Hi everyone, it's me Blazeladios. I decided I'd make a video about a topic that's kind of popped up recently, or rather, I see it a lot, especially online regarding the Straga weapon series and Geant units. There's also the mentality that follows this gear that I also want to talk about, as it's something that I want to discuss after seeing it enough. Before I get into any of that, however, I want to talk about the negatives of Straga weapons and Geant units. Now, for those that don't know, Straga has a potential Berserk unit that increases damage taken by 8% at its level 4 potential in exchange for 28% potency increase. While range and tech-based classes can really only mitigate this through fixes like Dreadkeeper 2, melee classes can use Form Soul 2 on all 3 units and weapon for 8% damage reduction, allowing melee users to mitigate Straga weapons' increased damage taken while also not sacrificing any damage. For the Geant units, it's a bit more complicated than just that. Geant units have minus 20 HP per unit for a total of 60 with a full set, while also giving you negative 50% status resistance down for a total of 150% for a full set. While it's not really worth trying to fix the status resistance due to a lack of any enemies that will status you and actually pose a threat with full NGS units, you can fix the HP reductions rather easily actually. Through the use of affixes such as Gigas X2 and Eildomina or Gigas X2 plus Dreadkeeper 2, you can mitigate or negate the HP reduction that these units provide. Gigas plus Eildomina will give you 45 HP for a full set, while Gigas plus Dreadkeeper 2 will give you 75 HP for a full set. Something that should be noted that I also see a lot is that Geant units do not increase the damage you take at all. I don't really know where this came from, but people claim that you take more damage with Geant units. With how to negate or mitigate the effects on these weapons and units, let's talk about the awful mentality that follows this gear. Before that, however, I want to mention that Geant units are undoubtedly the best units we have currently, stat-wise. While Vialto might give HP and damage reduction, none of that is really needed, as nothing outside of Gigantics will be a real threat to you, and while the armor variants are rather expensive in exchange for being slightly worse than Geant units with no fixes. Anyone looking to do solo content or wanting to do the most possible damage will go Geant units, as those provide such. This is obviously, of course, from someone who does solo content and speedruns urgent quest bosses and such. For a more casual player, mixing and matching with a set of Geant, Vialto, and Qualda armor variants is probably the best way to go, but if you're trying to min-max, you should go full Geant. This is mostly because the former provides you more flexibility than full Geant, but both are honestly an option for casual players. Now, let's talk about the mentality that follows the gear. Taking more damage and dying with Straga weapons and status ailments while wearing Geant units makes these bad. This mentality seems pretty commonplace, especially on PSO2 Global. While not to offend anyone, it feels as if most players on PSO2 Global, while they might play PSO2 NGS, they're not actually playing it or don't pay attention to anything. What this means is that they're not really grasping the core concepts of the class they play or how to actually play the game. Lots of players seem to have the mindset of if they die with Straga weapons, it's the weapon's fault because they see the plus 10% damage taken. This mindset is obviously wrong because these are also players that probably don't even dodge or counter and simply face tank everything. It should be said that that's obviously not what you're supposed to do, considering every class was given a counter or should step dodge, so naturally players should try and learn how to do so. Unfortunately, you wind up seeing really weird things like rangers going up point blank to shoot a boss with their rifle, or gunners shooting a boss from far away. They're having close range, which means they don't get the benefits of shooting close range. Unfortunately, this really isn't the case, and players instead, especially on the global from my own experience, have this weird priority of maxing their defenses by using HP affixes or damage reduction affixes, which gives nothing in terms of improving their actual damage. This isn't exclusive to NGS, of course. This was also something that was pretty prevalent in base game too. Back during the Hatred Primordial Darkness times, which for those new to PSO2 is a level 200 super version of the game's final boss, there was a player who claimed he never died and wanted to join my team. After inspecting his gear, the player had 400 plus HP per unit on a class with plenty of iframes and abilities to counter. This was the lesser class for those that don't know. This player's damage wasn't very high, just looking at his gear, as it emphasized staying alive over damage, which is a huge no-no in terms of gearing, even for a casual player. Hatred Primordial Darkness was a very tight on time quest, which had 22 minutes and 22 seconds to clear and a 2 death limit, meaning having high damage while also knowing how to dodge or counter was essential for clearing this quest. You couldn't just face tank everything and hope to succeed. This is an issue that bled into NGS, where players prioritize affixes with damage resistance or HP, in a game where every class is a way to counter or easily step dodge attacks, which leads to the issue of players not wanting to learn how to play their class even a little, and would rather just tank damage instead, and thus Straga weapons make them take more damage, makes them call the weapon series bad, which obviously isn't the case, as these are actually the strongest weapons currently available to us for the weapons Straga supports. Finally, we've got the negative status resistance that Geant units give you. Now, I want you to think to yourself, outside of the lizard enemies inflicting freeze or shock or even panic on you, has there ever been a status detrimental to the gameplay to the point where you died and it prevented you from progressing? The answer to this is obviously no, unless you're solo hunting gigantics, obviously, and you get status. Status in NGS is pretty minimal in impact. In general, outside of panic, shock, and freeze, which are mostly from the aforementioned lizard enemies that can inflict status on you won't actually be a detriment to your actual gameplay. All the game's current notable enemies, which are Pedisphera, Nexphera, all the Gigantics, and Dread enemies, none of these enemies can inflict status ailments on you that will outright end your runs. Well, obviously, with some bad RNG, a lizard can come up and status you while you're soloing a Gigantic, which has actually happened to quite a few people already. These things are easily the scariest enemies in PSO2 NGS. With that being said, those that are soloing Gigantics most likely fully know the risks of these enemies, but they choose to use Geant units anyways due to the amount of damage it provides and the PP that it provides, which obviously they far outweigh the effects of actually getting status. That being said, that brings a question. If the only players that can actually be affected by the negative status resistance of Geant units are players that do solo content and speedrun content, why should a casual player ignore Geant units or call them bad if getting frozen leads to dying? You just get revived a second later anyways. You can make the argument that you don't need that PP and damage as nothing in NGS demands them, sure, but why call them bad if negative status isn't going to actually impact you? The reason for this mostly treads back to most of the player base wanting HP and damage resistance over damage because they don't want to learn how to dodge, and something which may or may not get them killed makes them bad. I personally know casual players on my team that pick Geant units because they want to do a lot of damage, something which Geant obviously provides. We've had weapons back in PSO2 Classic called the Genin weapons, which dealt damage to us in exchange for PP recovery. We used it anyways because it was easy to obtain and a way to get more PP back fast, despite the risks. This is no different, and is a mentality that needs to stop as it leads to bad habits later. Geant units and Straga weapons are very strong, however what they bring to the table far exceeds the negatives, which can be mitigated or completely negated, because we're pretty spoiled when it comes to what affixes we currently have and what our weapons bring to the table. This is mostly because we're pretty spoiled with the kind of affixes we have, considering how we already have percent-based damage reduction combined with damage increases, or damage increases that also give HP up. Weapons and units having negatives are only a hindrance if you make them one by not learning how to dodge or counter with your classes. It's okay to die once in a while to something silly, but if you die a lot, it isn't a gear issue, it's a skill issue which only you can fix by wanting to improve at the game. In the end of the day, it's up to you what gear you choose and what you want to use, as we've got quite a few options which won't make or break the game for you. However, just because something has negative effects, it doesn't make it immediately bad. With that being said, my advice is to remember not to sink into the habit of investing too much into defenses and spend more on offense, and always try to learn how to counter or dodge with your class. If an affix grants you damage and HP or damage resistance, it's good. If it only grants you HP or damage resistance, it's bad. Thanks for watching everyone, and I hope you enjoyed this video, as it's a bit different from the usual ones I make. I might make more like this in the future as we get more weapons and gear, so stay tuned for those. I just felt as if this was a mentality issue that I wanted to address, as it's something that's been bothering me whenever I see it recently. At the end of the day, players are free to choose whatever they want and play however they want, but they really shouldn't complain if they're dying because of gear.